Enter the shadows of reality. This is World of True Crime, where evil leaves its mark. Let me tell you a story about one of the most notorious serial killers in history, Ted Bundy. Now, at first glance, you'd never guess what this guy was capable of. He wasn't the typical creepy type you'd expect. He was charming, good-looking, and even had a bright future ahead of him. But beneath all that, he was hiding something so dark, it shocked the world. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. From the beginning, his life was a bit unusual. For most of his childhood, he was raised by his grandparents and told that his mother was actually his sister. Can you imagine growing up like that? Later on, he found out the truth, and many believe that revelation affected him deeply. Ted seemed like a normal kid to most people. He was intelligent and even excelled in school, but those who knew him closely noticed he struggled socially. He was often awkward and had trouble forming real connections. As he grew older, he started to develop a fascination with things that most people would find disturbing, like crime stories and violent fantasies. Despite this, Ted worked hard to present himself as a normal guy. He went to college, studied psychology, and even became involved in politics. He volunteered for political campaigns and was described as a rising star by those around him. He had this ability to make people feel comfortable, like they could trust him. But behind that charming smile, he was planning something sinister. Bundy's crimes began in the 1970s, and he had a very calculated way of targeting his victims. He preyed on young women, usually college-aged, who he thought he could easily manipulate. His trick? He'd fake an injury, like putting on a sling or walking with crutches, and ask for help. Most of his victims thought they were helping a harmless man in need. But once they were close enough, he'd strike. The scariest part, he didn't stick to one area. Bundy was on the move constantly, committing murders in multiple states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. This made it incredibly hard for police to track him. Back then, law enforcement in different states didn't have the technology to share information like we do today. For years, Bundy terrorized communities while managing to stay one step ahead of investigators. He was clever and knew how to cover his tracks, but eventually in 1975 his luck ran out. He was pulled over by the police for a routine traffic stop, and that's when they discovered suspicious items in his car, things like handcuffs, a crowbar, and a ski mask. That arrest marked the beginning of his downfall. But here's the thing about Ted Bundy. He wasn't just evil, he was also arrogant. He thought he was smarter than everyone else, including the police. This overconfidence led to two dramatic escapes that sound like something out of a movie. The first escape happened in 1977. Bundy was allowed to represent himself in court, so he wasn't handcuffed during a hearing. He asked to visit the courthouse library to research his case, and while there, he jumped out of a second-story window and ran. For 6 days, he managed to evade the authorities before being recaptured. The second escape was even crazier. Later that year, Bundy managed to cut a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell and climbed through it. He lost enough weight to squeeze into the crawl space and eventually escaped the building entirely. This time, he was on the run for weeks and made his way to Florida. And this is where things got even more horrific. While in Florida, Bundy committed one of his most brutal attacks, the Chi Omega sorority house murders at Florida State University. In January 1978, he broke into the sorority house and violently attacked several women, killing 2 of them. The sheer brutality of the crime shocked the entire nation. Bundy was finally arrested again in February 1978. This time, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He left behind bite marks on one of his victims, and forensic experts matched them to his teeth, one of the key pieces of evidence that sealed his fate. His trials were a media circus. Bundy loved the attention and even acted as his own lawyer. He used his charm to manipulate people, and surprisingly, he still had fans. Some people believed he was innocent and others were simply fascinated by him. But the evidence was undeniable. Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death. For years, he sat on death row, occasionally confessing to his crimes, but never fully taking responsibility. He eventually admitted to killing over 30 women, but experts believe the real number could be much higher. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Crowds gathered outside the prison, cheering when they heard the news. So, what makes Ted Bundy's story so terrifying? It's not just the number of victims or the brutality of his crimes. It's the fact that he didn't look like a killer. He seemed normal, even charming, which made him all the more dangerous. Bundy's case changed how we think about serial killers. It showed us that evil doesn't always come in an obvious package. It also led to advancements in criminal profiling and forensic science, helping law enforcement catch predators like him in the future. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments. Does it surprise you that someone so normal could commit such horrific acts? And if there are other true crime stories you want me to cover, drop them below. Thanks for watching, and remember, always stay cautious and take care of yourselves.